The atmosphere in the kitchen of Blue Harbor Grill that evening was so heavy it felt as though a single deep breath might be enough to push someone over the edge. It was the dinner rush. Trays of seafood, fresh from the oven, still steaming, the scent of garlic butter and black pepper filling the air. Yet instead of the usual rhythm, there was the sharp, cutting voice of Victor Sloan, the head chef who had been with the restaurant for more than a decade. He stood tall, hands clasped tightly as if trying to restrain himself, but his eyes still burned with anger. In front of him was Noah Reed, a server who had only just completed his probationary period, his hands trembling after dropping an entire bundle of silverware to the floor just as a large table was waiting for their meals. In a flash, a porcelain plate on the prep counter was swiped off by Victor, shattering against the brick wall. The crash carried into the dining area, drawing curious glances and hushed murmurs. At a table near the kitchen door, a middle-aged woman folded her arms, shook her head, and sighed. She stood, slipped on her coat, and left a parting remark just loud enough for a few to hear. "I used to love this place. Now it's just disappointing." She walked out silently, leaving behind a quiet but heavy absence. In the corner of the room, where dim light fell on black and white photos of the Charleston harbor, a man sat quietly observing. His worn baseball cap and rolled-up shirt sleeves, paired with a calm, steady gaze that missed nothing, belonged to Elliot Harper, the founder and current CEO of the entire Blue Harbor Grill chain. Tonight, he wasn't in his corporate office wearing a perfectly tailored suit. He was blending into the evening crowd like any other guest, here to see for himself what sales reports and customer surveys could never reveal. Elliot ordered a light plate of baked clams. Then, as he waited, he quietly watched every movement in the restaurant. The glances customers exchanged, the small shrug of disappointed shoulders, the murmured conversations mingling with the sound of silverware, all of it came together into a heavy, muted soundtrack. Noah, with his youthful face and perpetually messy hair, was trying to regain his rhythm after the outburst. He moved quickly, but without confidence, his hands hesitating mid-motion as though bracing for another sudden reprimand. At the kitchen door, Victor still stood with arms folded, his gaze cold and unyielding on the staff. Elsewhere, Marina Cole, the assistant manager, moved briskly, deftly soothing guests while keeping the team from unraveling completely. Elliot watched her with particular interest. She carried the calm he recognized in people who understood the value of every word they spoke and every step they took. As he slowly lifted a glass of white wine to his lips, Elliot's mind drifted back more than 20 years to when he was a young man with nothing, scrubbing fish-crusted pans deep into the night at a small harbor diner. From the salty scent clinging to his sleeves to the sound of waves crashing against the pier after closing, it was all still vivid. Blue Harbor Grill was born from those years, a small waterfront restaurant that grew into a chain of 8 locations across the East Coast, carrying with it a promise to uphold genuine hospitality and respect for people. But looking at the scene before him now, angry shouts from the kitchen, guests walking out, staff with their heads down, Elliot knew something had veered off course. He wasn't here just to eat. He was here to find answers. And tonight, amid the scent of baked clams and melting butter, he knew he would be staying far longer than he had planned. Elliot's gaze moved slowly from table to table, as if he were reading each open page in a crowded room. The diner's whispers at first sounded like scattered fragments of conversation, but pieced together they formed a picture clear enough to sense the cracks beneath the surface. A middle-aged man, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, leaned toward the woman across from him and murmured, "It wasn't like this before. The service used to be great." The woman gave a slight nod, her brows knitting just a touch. "I don't understand how it's come to this tonight." Her voice carried just far enough to lodge itself in Elliot's memory, like a note that could not be ignored. At the next table, an elderly couple spoke in hushed tones, the old woman's voice barely more than a breath. "We've been waiting nearly 40 minutes. This is unacceptable." The old man only sighed, his eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses fixed on the kitchen. Elliot listened without interrupting, yet every word added another layer of weight to his chest. This was not just a few minor mishaps on a busy evening. This was the kind of fracture that had gone on long enough for regulars to feel it deeply. Noah passed by his table carrying a tray of drinks, his steps slightly unsteady. He paused for a moment at a table near the bar, trying to keep the tray perfectly level, but his hands still trembled. Elliot could see the tension in every movement, like a piece of music in which each note lagged behind for fear of playing the wrong one. For a brief moment, Noah's eyes met Elliot's. In that fleeting instant, Elliot gave the slightest nod, a gesture almost imperceptible yet carrying a silent message. "I understand, and I'm here." From the main entrance, Marina stepped out quickly to see off a customer who had just left. Her voice dropped low as she leaned slightly forward. "I truly apologize for tonight's experience. I hope you'll give us another chance." The guest only shook his head, a faint sad smile appearing before the door closed, leaving Marina standing still for a few seconds, her shoulders dipping just slightly. But then she turned, walking straight toward the kitchen, her eyes sharpening as if ready to face another wave. Inside, Victor stood blocking the doorway, arms folded across his chest, his gaze like a warning. Marina came closer, her voice lowered but clear. "You can't keep losing your temper like this. Our reputation is on the line." Victor narrowed his eyes, not answering right away, only tightening the straps of his apron before looking away. From his table, Elliot caught every expression and small movement between them. He didn't hear the entire exchange, but watching was enough to understand that the tension between them had been building for far longer than a single night. Over at the bar, two staff members leaned in close, speaking softly but still loud enough for Elliot to catch every word. "Did you hear what happened yesterday?" one asked, eyes darting quickly toward the kitchen. "Yeah. Victor went off on someone. It was bad." The other lowered his voice even more. "I heard someone threaten to post it online. If it spreads, we're dead." Elliot kept his face calm, but inside there was a sharp pang. This wasn't just work pressure. This was about conduct and workplace culture, the kind of thing that could bring down a brand in just days. Elliot pulled his phone from his coat pocket, opened the recording app, and placed it face down on the table. The screen went dark, but the microphone stayed on. Every sound around him now was not only reaching his ears, but being saved, like pieces of a puzzle for the larger picture he was forming in his mind. Not a single expression on his face gave away that he was collecting evidence. He remained the stranger in the corner, sipping his wine leisurely, eyes seeming to drift toward the window, while in reality, every moment, every word, every glance was being stored away in preparation for what was to come. The clink of glassware from the bar drifted out, mingling with the scent of garlic butter and grilled seafood, creating a hazy yet uneasy backdrop. Elliot lifted his wine glass, swirling it lightly out of habit, his eyes still following Noah returning from the bar. Carrying a tray of drinks, Noah moved quickly through the narrow rows of tables. As he approached one near the bar, a slight tremor in his wrist sent a glass of water spilling across the white tablecloth, cold droplets splashing onto a guest's leg. A sharp exhale of surprise broke the air, drawing the gaze of several nearby tables. Victor appeared almost instantly, as if he had been waiting for the mistake. His face tightened, eyes flashing with unrestrained irritation. "Noah, what's wrong with you? You can't even get something this simple right?" His voice cut through the space, clear and sharp enough that everyone nearby turned to look. Noah lowered his head, still gripping the tray, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Marina came quickly from the kitchen door, placing a hand on Victor's shoulder, her voice low and gentle. "Victor, stop. We can handle this more calmly." But Victor brushed her hand away, his lips pressed into a hard line, then turned and walked back into the kitchen, leaving behind a heavy silence in the room. Elliot could feel the tightening of the atmosphere, not from one action alone, but from the collective weight of many glances and whispered words held back. He exhaled softly, set his glass down, and his other hand gripped the edge of the table. These were no longer isolated warning signs. They were the result of a chain of problems that had taken root. Through the kitchen door, he caught another moment. Derek was handing Noah a dry towel, speaking quietly but with enough sincerity to reach the younger man. "Don't let him get to you. Everyone has bad nights." Noah gave only a small nod, avoiding eye contact, but still clutched the towel tightly as if it were an anchor. Elliot watched the scene through the gap in the door, not stepping in, yet feeling a familiarity within himself, as though he were looking back at his own younger self, judged solely on a small mistake during an exhausting day. Needing a moment of quiet to sort through what he had just seen, Elliot walked toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. Soft yellow light fell across the pale blue tiled floor, reflecting off the worn edges of his shoes. In the small space, the sound of running water from the sink was clear. He bent to catch some in his hands, splashing it onto his face, feeling the coolness spread across his skin as he tried to wash away the thoughts spiraling in his mind. When he looked up, his eyes caught a corner of the mirror where 3 sheets of paper were hastily taped to the wall. Stepping closer, he saw they were 3 handwritten resignation letters, the paper slightly wrinkled, the hurried handwriting still careful. Each letter was brief but carried a fatigue and disappointment that needed no lengthy explanation. Elliot brushed his fingertips lightly across the surface, feeling the pressure of each stroke etched into the page. Without reading in detail, he knew this was the sign of something far more serious than what was visible out on the floor. He pulled out his phone, taking clear photos of each letter, then opened his messages to Caleb. 3 employees are about to quit. Things here are going downhill fast. After sending it, he stood still for a few seconds, the space around him feeling narrower by the moment. Caleb's reply was short. Need backup? Elliot looked at the screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard before typing, Not yet. I need to see the full picture first. The message sent, the screen went dark, but in his mind, a plan was already beginning to take shape, even if he wasn't yet sure where it would start. Back at the table, Elliot sat down, slipping his phone into his coat pocket as if he had never taken it out. From that distance, he could still hear Victor's voice carrying from the kitchen, not as loud as before, but sharp enough to leave a scratch in the atmosphere. He gently swirled the glass in front of him, the wine catching the warm yellow light and scattering it into shimmering yet cold reflections. Marina passed by, checked on a nearby table, then headed straight toward Victor. Her voice was low but firm, clear enough to slip beyond the kitchen door. You're pushing things too far. The staff is losing morale and the customers can see it. Victor wiped the sweat from his brow, avoiding her eyes. We're overloaded. I don't have time to be gentle. Marina held her gaze steady. They are not the problem. The problem is how we treat them. Elliot leaned slightly, like an audience member watching a tense play whose every act he already knew by heart. In Victor, he saw not only anger, but exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come in a single night but builds over months and years of pushing against the limits. When that endurance finally breaks, it turns into shouting that everyone can hear, though few see the roots beneath. Near the bar, 2 staff members continued speaking in hushed tones, believing their words were lost in the clatter of cutlery and the hum of the kitchen fans. Same thing happened last week, one said, glancing quickly toward the kitchen door. Victor yelled at a new hire until she cried. I heard someone even recorded it. The other nodded slightly. If that video gets online, then... The sentence trailed off, but Elliot didn't need to hear the rest to know exactly what the consequences would be. He took a sip of wine, setting the glass down softly as if not to disturb the fragile tension draped over the room. In his mind, the pieces began to align. The disappointed eyes of customers, Noah's hesitant steps, Marina's strained smile, Victor's sharp voice, the resignation letters in the restroom, and now the quiet chatter among staff. This was not just a bad evening. This was a warning. Elliot picked up his phone again, this time not to record but to open a message to Caleb. I'm staying until I have the full picture. Keep this quiet. Don't intervene until I say so. He placed the phone face down on the table, fingers interlaced, sitting perfectly still. Outwardly, he was still the quiet diner enjoying his meal. But inside, he had stopped merely observing. He was preparing. And when Elliot Harper prepared, it meant change was coming. Not small adjustments, but change that would cut straight to the roots. Noah came back into Elliot's line of sight, carrying a tray stacked with plates, moving slowly as if each step had to be carefully considered. His fingers gripped the edge of the tray so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. As he bent to set a dish down for a table of guests, Elliot noticed his breathing was quicker than usual, his movements lacking fluidity, his eyes always cast downward to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. A few customers watched, their expressions a mix of sympathy and expectation. Elliot remained still, his eyes following every motion. He knew this feeling well, the pressure to be flawless while trying to regain balance after a mistake, all under the weight of people watching. For a brief moment, Noah looked up and met Elliot's eyes. Elliot gave a small nod, a subtle gesture that sent the message someone understood and would not judge. Noah took a breath, his shoulders easing slightly before he turned away. Not long after, Noah approached another table with a water jug. As he tilted it to pour, his wrist slipped slightly, sending a stream of cold water across the table and onto a guest's leg. The scrape of a chair and a startled exclamation followed. Victor appeared again as if stepping out from the shadows, his voice ringing out sharply. "Noah, what's wrong with you? You can't even handle something this simple?" His tone was cutting and loud enough to make everyone turn their heads. Noah froze in place, eyes fixed on the floor, his face flushed red with shame. Marina stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. "Victor, calm down. We can talk about this later." But Victor refused, his reply clear and firm. "Later? The customers can see exactly how poorly we're doing right now." The air grew heavy and dense. Nearby diners exchanged uneasy glances, a few shaking their heads subtly. Elliot's hand tightened on the edge of the table, feeling as if time was slowing while the pressure rose quickly, like water filling a narrow chamber. He knew this wasn't simply about one person making mistakes. This was the clearest sign of an environment cracking apart, where people reacted more than they listened, and where exhaustion had already replaced patience. As the tension in the dining room began to ease, Marina quickened her pace, circling around to intercept Victor right at the kitchen entrance. She placed a light hand on his shoulder, her voice low but firm. "Victor, stop. The customers are watching." Her eyes flicked toward the nearby tables, where a few pairs of eyes still followed the scene. Victor brushed her hand off, his breathing heavier than usual. "Let them watch. At least they'll see why everything is moving so slowly." His voice wasn't a shout, but each word carried a cold weight sharp enough to make those nearby fall silent. Elliot sat still, his eyes fixed on the scene before him, feeling clearly how each of Victor's words was widening the gap between the kitchen and the floor. He saw Noah disappear inside, his small frame swallowed by hanging pans and the thick scent of seafood. In the corner of the kitchen, Derek handed Noah a dry towel and gave his shoulder a gentle pat. "Don't let that bring you down. Everyone's had nights like this." Noah replied with the faintest nod, though his hand still gripped the towel as if holding on to something solid. Elliot stood and walked toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. The space there was narrow and still, the only sound the steady stream of water from the faucet. He bent down to splash his face, letting the cool water wash away some of the heaviness clinging to him. When he looked up, his eyes caught sight of 3 sheets of paper hastily taped to the wall beside the mirror. Stepping closer, he saw they were 3 resignation letters. The paper was slightly wrinkled, the ink smudged in places, yet each word was clear, direct, and coldly concise. There were no long complaints, only sentences that revealed just how deeply the fatigue had set in. Elliot let his fingertips rest lightly on the edge of the paper as if reading words that had never been spoken in meetings but were louder than ever in moments like this. He took out his phone, photographed all 3 letters, and sent them immediately to Caleb. 3 people are about to leave. This is a sign of rapid collapse." Seconds later, a reply lit up his screen. "Want me to send someone down?" Elliot stood there, eyes still on the screen before typing his response. "Not yet. I need to see everything first." The message sent, the screen went dark, but the resolve inside him burned brighter than ever. Elliot returned to his table, sitting down as if he had only stepped away to wash his hands. Outside, the restaurant's noise continued, but he noticed those sounds no longer blended into a steady rhythm. They were fractured by shouts from the kitchen, the clatter of trays striking together, and the heavy silences that settled between tables. At the service counter, Marina was leaning in to speak with Victor, and Elliot didn't need to hear the words to know it was not a gentle exchange. Every so often, her eyes flicked quickly toward the dining floor as if to ensure customers couldn't overhear, yet Victor's voice was still loud enough for a few words to slip out. "They have to be tougher. This isn't a place for coddling." Marina's reply came in a lower tone, but each word was deliberate. "If this continues, you won't have anyone left to lead." Elliot watched the scene like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, seeing the ground erode bit by bit. He knew Victor wasn't entirely wrong about the pressure of the job, but the way he poured it onto others was exactly what was driving people away. In Victor's eyes, Elliot saw not only anger but also a flicker of fear of losing control, of no longer being able to hold everything together. Not far away, an older couple stood by the host stand speaking with Marina. The woman, her neatly styled silver hair framing a composed face, kept her tone calm yet clear. "We've been coming here for years, but tonight feels different. Not just slow, but cold." The man beside her gave a slight nod. "The staff look tired, tense. It makes us feel uneasy, too." Marina nodded, her eyes steady even as the corners of her mouth pressed together slightly. "I understand, and I'm sorry for this. We'll do our best to improve." Elliot stayed still, letting the words sink in as if each one was a hammer strike against an already cracked wall. He knew customers sensed everything, not just the food, but the atmosphere itself. And if that atmosphere was filled with tension, then no matter how good the meal, it would lose the flavor of genuine welcome. All the while, Elliot didn't realize that a small round camera mounted on the ceiling near his table was recording his every move. Elsewhere, just a few blocks away, that footage was being displayed on a monitor in the surveillance room at Blue Harbor Grill's headquarters. There, Caleb Price had just stopped scrolling past the other camera feeds when he recognized the familiar face beneath the baseball cap. In the quiet surveillance room at Blue Harbor Grill's headquarters, the glow from a single monitor lit Caleb Price's face. He leaned slightly forward, adjusting the camera angle to get a clearer view. Even with Elliot wearing a baseball cap and a simple button-down shirt, Caleb recognized him instantly. There was no mistaking it. The man sitting in the corner like any other customer was the founder and CEO himself. Caleb quickly pulled out his phone and typed a message. "You're live on camera. Everything okay?" His eyes stayed fixed on the screen where Elliot was bent over, jotting notes on a napkin and occasionally glancing toward the kitchen. After a moment's hesitation, Caleb added a single word. "Backup?" At the restaurant, Elliot felt the faint vibration in his pocket. He glanced down at the screen and read the message. "You're live on camera. Everything okay? Backup?" He exhaled slowly, then typed back, his fingers moving with deliberate care. "Not yet. Just watch and say nothing." The message sent, he placed the phone face down on the table. Elliot's gaze swept the room. Noah was clearing glasses from a table near the bar, forcing a smile when the guests thanked him. Marina moved between sections, managing orders while answering customers, her steps quick but never frantic. In the kitchen, Victor still carried that taut, unrelenting demeanor, stepping onto the floor from time to time as if to keep the entire team's pace under his control. Elliot knew that if any outside intervention appeared now, everything would change, and he would lose the chance to see the unfiltered reality of a shift. He needed the original picture, untouched, not tidied up to please anyone's eyes. Outside the side door, Noah stepped out and took a deep breath as if to steady himself. Elliot, still seated inside but close enough, caught the sound of him speaking softly into his phone. "I'm fine, Mom. It's just, I think I'm going to quit. I'm not sure I'm cut out for this." His voice trembled slightly, laced with fatigue and self-blame. Elliot lowered his head, letting each of those words settle inside him like a quiet reminder. Elliot stood in the hallway leading to the side door, leaning lightly against the darkened wooden wall worn by years of use. He wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, but the stillness of the night and Noah's voice were enough for each word to reach him. "I don't want to worry you, Mom. It's just that I feel like I'm messing everything up. Here the pressure is too much." He paused, his voice dropping as if speaking to himself. "I don't think I'm right for this job." Those words made Elliot instinctively think back to his own 20s, when he too had stood in some hidden corner, his hands rough from washing dishes all night, trying to hide his exhaustion so as not to disappoint anyone. The pressure back then had been different, but the feeling of being swallowed whole by work and doubting himself was exactly the same. Noah ended the call, slipped his phone into his pocket, and walked back into the restaurant wearing a mask of calm that was only an imitation. Marina caught sight of him at the drink prep station and called out gently, "Noah, can we talk for a moment?" He turned, his eyes showing clear fatigue despite his polite demeanor. Marina lowered her voice. "I know tonight was hard, but I've seen you trying, and that matters more than the mistakes." Noah stayed quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I'm not sure I'm good enough." Marina shook her head slightly. "No one is great from the start. It takes time to learn, and I'm working on changing the way things operate here. If you stay, you won't be facing it alone." From across the room, Elliot watched the scene. In his eyes, a small spark of hope flickered, not because everything had been solved, but because he saw that someone on the team was willing to step up to hold on to the most valuable thing of all, the people. Elliot sat back at his table, his eyes following Noah, Marina, and Derek, as if committing each final detail to memory for the complete picture he needed. The pieces were now clear: the drop in morale, leadership distorted by pressure, and the risk of losing promising employees simply because they had not been guided the right way. He took out his phone, opened the chat with Caleb, and typed slowly, "Tomorrow morning, assemble the entire team here. No delays." After a brief pause, he added, "This is no longer about control, it's about people, and we're going to start with them." The message sent, Elliot set the phone down, leaned back in his chair, and let his eyes sweep the space once more, as if to etch every detail into his memory. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the large glass window, Victor pushed open the restaurant door. His coat was draped loosely over his shoulder, his gaze fixed on the kitchen counter, ready for a long shift. But he stopped short. Every staff member was standing in a circle in the middle of the dining room, silent, and at the center was Elliot, no longer in the baseball cap and casual shirt, but in a crisp, deep blue suit. Victor froze for a few seconds, his eyes meeting Elliot's. Surprise flickered across his face before giving way to slow realization. "Elliot," he almost whispered. Elliot gave a small nod. "Good morning, Victor." The atmosphere in the room shifted, taut yet silent. Victor walked forward slowly, saying nothing, but he knew that today would be unlike any day that had come before. The room was so quiet that the ticking of the wall clock could be heard clearly. Elliot stood tall, his gaze moving slowly across each face. Marina with a cautious yet steady look, Noah with his shoulders slightly tense as if bracing for a reaction, Derek with his arms folded behind him, and Victor still wearing a guarded expression. Elliot began in a deep but clear voice. "Last night I was here as a customer, Today, I stand before you as your leader." He paused, letting the words settle into the air. "I'm not here to criticize, but to show everyone the truth." He reached into his jacket pocket, took out a small remote, and pressed a button. The screen mounted near the bar lit up, showing footage from the security cameras the night before. On the screen, Victor was seen shouting at Noah, his voice sharp and clear. "You can't even handle something this simple?" Then came the image of Derek stepping back, Marina stepping in to intervene, and Noah standing with his head bowed in silence. No one spoke. A few glances met briefly before darting away. Victor's fists tightened, while Elliot let the clip run for a few more seconds before switching it off. "I'm not showing this to shame anyone," he said slowly, "but so we can face the reality." Elliot's eyes locked on Victor's, though his tone remained calm. "How do you explain this?" The question wasn't loud, but it fell into the room like a heavy stone, leaving everyone waiting for the answer. Victor stood in silence for a moment, as if searching for words in the weight of the stillness. At last, he drew in a slow breath and said, "I have been under too much pressure. The work keeps piling up, and we're short on staff. Reacting that way, it wasn't right, but at the time all I could think about was keeping everything moving." Elliot gave a slight nod, not interrupting. "The pressure is real," he replied. "But does shouting in public, hurting your staff in front of customers, does that help anything?" The question was not aimed at Victor alone, but seemed to echo through the room as a reminder to everyone present. Victor pressed his lips together, his voice dropping lower. 3 years ago, when this place was on the verge of closing, I stayed. I worked double shifts and kept it alive. But things are different now. There are so many new employees lacking experience, and I don't have the time to train them. I forgot how to lead. Elliot stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Victor. What you've done for this place, I know and I value, but sacrifices in the past don't give us the right to harm the people in the present. Leadership isn't just about keeping the restaurant running, it's about how you make your team feel when they're working alongside you. His words fell not as a harsh judgment, but as a solid truth that could not be ignored. In Victor's eyes, the defiance slowly gave way to recognition, slow but genuine. From the perspective of someone who has led many teams through crises, I believe that a team is not sustained solely by procedures or discipline, but is nurtured through respect and a spirit of solidarity. When a leader understands that people are not interchangeable links in a chain, but the very heartbeat of the entire system, pressure no longer remains a solitary burden. It becomes a shared strength that drives everyone forward. Tonight's story is not just about a restaurant changing its atmosphere. It is proof that listening and patience can restore an entire team. If you believe that a workplace can improve through small but consistent actions, hit like and subscribe to follow more inspiring stories like this. And before you go, leave a comment with the words, "Listen," as a reminder that every lasting change always begins with the genuine desire to understand.